Gary Lelou. I was finally able to watch that announcement David Miscavige made to Scientologists in 1986. I believe that was the correct year. While he announced the passing of L. Ron Hubbard, I couldn't help but wonder what was going through David Miscavige's head as he was making that speech. Do you think he was already planning to take over Scientology at that early stage? Also, is it indicative of all destructive cults to not have a secession plan in place once the guru dies or drops his or her body to move on to new and uncharted levels of enlightenment? Well, thanks for asking, Gary. And actually, this is kind of an interesting topic because I'm reading the new book that just came out a couple days ago by Jesse Prince called Expert Witness, which is his testimonial or memoir about his experiences in Scientology. And he worked one-on-one with David Miscavige for years and had quite a bit to say about that time period. I'm only about halfway through the book. I'm really looking forward to interviewing Jesse on my channel here, by the way. That'll be coming up probably pretty soon. He agreed to do it. We just need to figure out the timing and stuff. I need to finish the book. But he talks a lot about David Miscavige during that time period. And I already knew a lot of this, but some of the inside data and some of the observations Jesse makes are absolutely fascinating. And one of them being absolutely confirming that David Miscavige was pretty much already well in hand and being pretty much in charge of the day-to-day operations of Scientology on on the ground level. I mean, he was the one making a lot of the decisions having to do with what was going on with Scientology well before Hubbard dropped his body, or it was announced that he had died. So that was he'd been maneuvering and making things happen and getting himself in place and in position where people had to follow his orders and directions. And it was only L. Ron Hubbard from a remote location who was being cared for by Pat and Annie Broker. They were nominally superior to David Miscavige in terms of a pecking order or command channel because Hubbard, of course, was still alive. When Hubbard was still alive. Once Hubbard died, then there was a power struggle between Pat Broker and David Miscavige, and I'm going to read about that in Jesse's book. For one, I know about it already. Pat Broker was not the sort of ruthless model of dictatorial authoritarian control that David Miscavige modeled himself to be. And so I don't think he really, was ready for that battle or was prepared to, take it all the way like David Miscavige was. Miscavige already had a loyal, cadre of people who were around him and would do anything he said. And he was very used to being in authority and control. And in fact, he and Pat Broker had been so confident of, being in charge and not being found out about, even some of the shenanigans they got up to, like taking Hubbard's money and going off and blowing a bunch of it gambling in Vegas. They were just kind of living high on the hog and enjoying it. And Pat and David Miscavige were kind of in this little, partnership this way when Hubbard was still alive. So once Hubbard died, Miscavige's like, well, power is assumed. That was his thing. You take it. You want power, you take it. And that was exactly how he acted. And I don't think Broker was particularly interested in running all of Scientology on a day-to-day basis the same way Miscavige was. So Miscavige ended up winning that fight. And that is probably more a model of how secession actually works in destructive cult groups or I don't know, I don't want to say religious groups, but cult groups certainly. It's not like there's a big, broad survey of this. Every group is so unique and different, and its command structure is so different and unique. A lot of them look very loosey-goosey, or there's a father-type figure who's in charge. I'm thinking right now of like the family or some of the movements that happened in the 60s and 70s. And then when that guy died, all the followers just kind of, dispersed. That nobody really stepped up and took over. On the other hand, there are many times when something like that's happened, where the father figure has died and the wife took over. She stepped up. Well, of course, that wasn't going to happen in Scientology. It very easily could have, But Mary Sue had already been gotten out of the picture by David Miscavige years before, because she was the one who was scapegoated over the whole Operation Snow White program fiasco, where the church got raided in the 70s. People went to jail, and she was at the top of the list of people going to jail, and none of them turned or flipped on Hubbard. So they ended up taking the fall. And then after she got out of jail, Miscavige was like, well, you're not coming back around here. They put her up in a house in Hollywood, but she was not in any kind of power position at all. He made absolutely sure of that. So anyway, like I said, though, sometimes the wife will step up. I've seen a few groups where that's happened. Or there's some other scenario like Miscavige where a single ruthless lone individual steps up and does what needs to be done in order to take the reins of power. And by that I mean they usually have to be pretty merciless and ruthless in enforcing their way and making sure that they are taking over in such a way that everybody gets that they're the one in charge now. And they have to make an example usually of one or two people and demonstrate their power and authority. And there's a whole lot of dynamic that goes along with all of this. It's not for nice people. Nice guys don't finish last in this kind of situation. If you're not willing to, step all over people and ruin people, just who are your competitors in order to get that kind of power, you're not going to get that kind of power. That is how it works. Then you also have situations or scenarios where you have like a council of people take over. Now, I don't know exactly what sort of political backstabbing or activity happened within the world of the Jehovah's Witnesses, for example. They have a council of elders, and my friend Lloyd Evans, who I've done 3 apostate episodes with, said that it was sort of the survival of the dumbest in terms of who rose to power within that little group. And yet still, these are the people running this place. So they might be really stupid people, but they're savvy enough to get into this position where their needs are cared for, and they are able to tell other people what to do within the world of Jehovah's Witnesses, and those people listen, and they follow their orders and directions. So, so somehow they got that set up. And otherwise, like I said, the group just sort of disappears entirely, and you never hear from them again. And their literature just sort of, goes into the dustbins of history. And there have been a lot of groups, countless numbers of groups that you've never heard of that come up and last for a generation and then fade away. And as I've said before, I think the key to these groups actually continuing to have a continuous succession, and by the second or third iteration, they probably start putting procedures in place as to who's going to take over. But they also have to broaden their destructive cultness a little bit in order to get more mainstream and attract more followers. They have to lighten up a little bit. It's very necessary at the beginning that they be so ruthless and controlling. I mean, and it's not necessary like it has to be that way, but if you're going to, create a fanatical group of followers and you want them to be fanatical, then it does have to be that way. If you want to just have a nice book club or, movie group or, sewing circle or something, then yeah, you can skip all the ruthless crap. But if you want to build a group of followers who are going to do anything you ask them to do, you're going to have to be a ruthless mofo. That's just kind of how that goes. Anyway, so by the time Miscavige was giving that speech in 1986 announcing Hubbard's death and, giving this whole song and dance, smoke and mirrors nonsense about how there were more levels and how Hubbard went off to research, the upper potentials of OT, and he left instructions that everything was going to be fine. I mean, Miscavige related this whole conversation that happened between him and L. Ron Hubbard, which was just a total farce. It was a complete fantasy. That conversation never happened as far as I know. I don't know when it could have or how it could have. I mean, Hubbard was there. Miscavige was down here. Miscavige was not going and talking to Hubbard when he was up there. That was what Annie and Pat Broker were doing. So anyway, Miscavige already had all of his secession plans firmly in place I am sure, by the time he was giving that speech. There you go.